The Sound of the Shell. William Golding's 1951 novel Lord of the Flies is considered a classic, having been taught in English classes across the Western world for generations. Golding, having been an English teacher himself when writing this story, designed it to have clear messages for students. However, as time has passed, the language has eroded the relatability for students today, and what is relevant to a young boy in 1950s Britain is different town to town, let alone encountering it as a New Zealand student in the 20s. In order for us to break down what this text is trying to get across to us, we need to start by understanding the context Lord of the Flies exists within. Lord of the Flies was written in direct response to the text The Coral Island. The Coral Island expressed a view that young British boys placed in an extreme scenario were bound to work together harmoniously to achieve success, as this was the British way. From our Aotearoa New Zealand context, we already know well that this opinion of the British doesn't hold true in all circles. William Golding, as an English teacher of young boys himself, entirely disbelieved this eventuality. Instead, Golding believed that without the reigning influence of society, without adults and enforcement of laws, boys would instead be boys, and I mean this in the most detrimental way possible. To demonstrate Golding's idea that boys left to their own devices will be corrupted, Golding names his book after a famous demon. The title Lord of the Flies refers to a character in Philistine literature, Beelzebub. This sets a tone at the outset for how this island may go. Beelzebub, or Beelzebul, is a name derived from a Philistine god, formerly worshipped in Ekron and later adopted by some Abrahamic religions as a major demon. In theological sources, predominantly Christian, Beelzebub is sometimes another name for the devil, similar to Satan. He is known in demonology as one of the 7 princes of hell. The Dictionnaire Infernal describes Beelzebub as being capable of flying, known as the Lord of the Flyers, or the Lord of the Flies. It is from this version that we make this intertextual connection. Beelzebub is commonly described as placed high in hell's hierarchy and is linked with sins of pride, gluttony, false gods. These qualities should be paid close attention to as the novel progresses. The novel was written during the 1940s and was published in 1951. During this time, the influence of World War II weighed heavily on the minds of Golding's reader and indeed himself. The context for this novel is within World War II. A group of boys are the sole survivors after a plane crash lands on an island. In poor weather, the plane is dragged out to sea, leaving a scar on the land and many young boys to fend for themselves. Based on the details we're given in the first chapter, we understand that these boys are young. Ralph, who is described as being one of the eldest, has only recently lost the roundedness of childhood, but not yet become gawky with adolescence. We can assume then that he is around 12 years old. He is of a similar age to Jack, Sam and Eric, and Simon. Piggy is not much younger and is of a similar age to Roger. Other boys on the island are younger, perhaps 6 years old. We are introduced to our most important characters in this chapter, the first of which is Ralph. Ralph is the son of a naval officer and is described as a leader, predominantly because of his charismatic personality and good looks. Golding plays on the idea that good-looking people are good people. It's common in tales of this time period and before. Just like in a traditional fairy tale, we know that the pretty kid is the nice one and that the ugly old woman is probably a witch. Ralph is pitted against Jack in the first chapter, and this is a duo to watch. Jack is the leader of the choir and therefore assumes he is the natural choice to be the chief. Unfortunately, Jack is a bespotted redhead and doesn't gather the majority vote. Our other significant character is Piggy, who would prefer to be called anything but. What we learn about him here is that he has asthma, lives with his sweet shop owner auntie, and thinks himself intelligent. He attaches himself to Ralph straight away. We try to feel sorry for Piggy, but his presentation and stuffy knowledge about things makes it hard. In the very beginning, he finds himself caught short after eating the fruit, and this sets the tone for this character from the beginning. We want to feel bad, but the writing encourages us to see making fun of him as only natural. Why might they have been on the aeroplane? Textual clues, such as their wearing of uniforms and a large group of them being part of the choir, indicate that perhaps they were travelling for a competition. However, there's no specific reason given. Rather, it might be good to assume that the context is intentionally left unclear, so that we can apply this scenario to one that we might be a part of. To add to the mystery, both Ralph and Piggy mention the first night there being a horrific storm, saying, "The storm must have dragged it out to sea. It wasn't half dangerous with all of them tree trunks falling." describing how the plane was dragged off the island. But the beginning of this chapter is bright and sunny, enough to strip off and take a swim. Simply by picking up this book and reading the first few pages, it is clear that our narrator is not trying to emulate the observational style of a pre-teenage boy. Golding uses sophisticated language such as efflorescence, specious, effulgence, decorous, fulcrum, strident, and immured in the first few pages of the novel. While some days I wish that students did use this language, this is not a reality in our daily lives, and it isn't a reality for his characters either. In contrast, Ralph and Piggy frequently mispronounce asthma as asthma, and Piggy in particular, despite being the bearer of stereotypical intelligence symbolism, speaks in dramatic contrast to Golding's narrative voice. Piggy frequently uses contractions of an instead of and with persistent parataxis creating long sentences that seem like he just can't stop talking. The other boys use now outdated slang such as wizzo. The contrast between Golding's narrative voice and the reality of the kids speaking act as an imposing outside force. The narrator is reflective of the perception Britain has of well-educated, formal young men, while the sharp contrast of the rough-around-the-edges boys shows through their dialogue just how out of touch with reality this perception is. Preteen boys are not poetic, eloquent, or glamorous, and people wouldn't naturally be either without a society that expected it from them. In Chapter 1, we've met our characters. Ralph, who is considered attractive, has been voted as leader. What sets him apart beyond that is his calling the boys together, using the conch, which in itself was Piggy's idea. Jack, who has in the traditional world setting been awarded leader of the choir, has retained his position as leader of the hunters by Ralph's election. And Piggy, as the boy with glasses, is known to us now, has found his start on the island to be much the same as before. He is bullied for his looks, overlooked as a leader despite demonstrating the most initiative of any character, and has ended up with a pretty rough deal. In the outside world, a war is going on, and it seems as if the adults our characters think will save them are having problems of their own to deal with. As the novel progresses, the relationships between the boys are explored in this stressful scenario. As the title suggests, issues with gluttony, pride, and false gods drive the characters. With a war going on outside, in this microcosm of young British boys, we see that at our truest nature, we ourselves are no more than beasts.